Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a moment. Appreciate you for taking time out of your day to join us. And I think we're going to deliver some high value content to help you guys with your business and to increase conversions, help you with prospecting.
So as we prep here and get people connected to the live, and we'll get started with this week's episode of the Digital Advisor Weekly.
So when it comes to a founder story, the importance of it is really motives. What you're trying to do, as we in the financial industry have experienced over and over again, the people that we approach, that we develop relationships with, the key factor to whether they're going to do business with you comes down to one word. What's that? Trust, trust, trust. And so they in the back of their mind, they're thinking, what is in it for them? What's the catch? What's their motive? And that's what a great founder story accomplishes, because it helps you determine exactly, so that you do not hesitate. And not only should you know your founder story, but everybody around you should know your founder story, so that it continues to enhance your brand. And we talked about what's the number one reason somebody decides to work with you, and that is trust. All right, so what's the quickest way to build trust? Storytelling. I missed it. All right. And why storytelling? Because storytelling engages the parts of the brain that do create that relational trust, and it allows the brain to connect, because we're using which side of the brain? The emotional relational part of our brains. We're going to go through that shortly here. And it acts as a pathway to engaging the right brain. That's that side of the brain that's relational and emotional and powerful. That's where the love side of our brain is engaged. That's why we feel drawn to certain people in our lives, and we actually feel repelled by other people in our lives. So it is important to take that into consideration. So often we believe that if we just prove to them the logic behind why it's important for them to move forward with our recommendations, that will be enough to compel them to do business with us. And we know from experience, if you've been in the industry for very long, you know that's not true, unfortunately. All right, but it allows, when you do tell a story, for someone to become a participant in your story. All right, so we talk about the left brain and the right brain. All of us study really, really hard to know our job well, but that really is the analytical left side of our brain. And that's the thinking, mathematics, facts, logics, and logic. And it's very rare that that's enough to win over someone. Maybe if you have a hardcore engineer, that may be enough. But for the most part, it always requires the right side of the brain, because logic may get them to agree, but feeling that their feelings and trust will get them to act. So you have to do both, and there's a balance. But if you want them to take action, you've got to engage the right side of their brain. And the most effective way to do that is storytelling. All right, so we've talked about this. Here's the statistics in the research study that I couldn't read 2 slides ago, and I'm going to fix that for the next presentation. But the left side of the brain only accounts for 10 to 20% of sales, whereas the right side of the brain, the relational, emotional side, where you invite them in, making sure that we use storytelling to allow people to identify with our stories, connect, and feel like you have understanding and compassion for their particular circumstances. That's the right side of the brain. We know that because it involves the chemical, or what we call the trust chemical, oxytocin, which is responsible for the rush of feeling that people get when they feel like a relational connection with somebody. And I know my wife came home from our event last week in Minneapolis and met many of you who were there at that event. And on the way home, she was super excited about the connections she had made with advisors, and was sharing with me her excitement about feeling so much. She says, I can do my job now so much better as a writer and a content writer and an editor, because I feel like I know these people now. I feel more relationally connected, and now I better understand their motives because I understand their backstory. When I understand where they've come from, the journey that they've been through, the challenges they've overcome, she now understands the motives behind the story that is trying to be told. And she says, I can write more effectively for these advisors because I know their story. All right. And we know the purpose of the founder story. It's a bit redundant, but specifically, it's to allow them to get to know who you are, your principles and values. And those are important because they want to know that you understand them. And if you are attracting people that you don't understand, and I'm not going to give specific groups of people, but you know your tribe. So you have to figure out, and I always do a one-page paper, brainstorm of what are all the things that are most important to me as the advisor. But what are the most important things to our family? And unfortunately, our politics, our faith, our principles, and whether legacy is important or it's not important, all of those things play a very important role to writing your founder story and attracting people who have shared experiences, shared values, shared principles, because they feel like you will become an advocate for them because you advocate the same things for yourself. So it is important to attract like-minded people, but not just like-minded from a logical standpoint, like-minded from a principle and values. And that's what builds trust. And so I encourage you to get clarity on that. Sometimes you need clarity by getting outside perspective. That's last week in Minneapolis. That's what we were able to do. Pull a group of people together and give outside perspective to your particular story and give you feedback about what makes sense and what falls short. Because if it falls short, then it's really empty storytelling. We want to make sure that it connects the way that you want it to connect with the people you want to connect with. So very important. I encourage you, if you're part of AMH, you feel free to schedule a premiere call and I can brainstorm that through with you, but you do want clarity. And values, of course, values play a larger role in the strategy you create. If you're creating the same strategy for every single person who comes in your office, you're probably going to have a lower conversion rate than if you personalize that strategy based on the values you've been able to determine in your sales process. People may care as much about their family as you do, but if they have 2 children and they're both and one has special needs and the other one is struggling with an addiction, then their legacy planning is going to be much different than a family that has 2 children that are married and have very successful careers. So you wouldn't sell the same financial plan to both those circumstances. They both have the same values, but you also want to make sure you take into consideration their particular strategy or their circumstances, their particular circumstances in combination with their values. Okay, so how do we put together an effective, strong story? Well, story brand is the next session. I won't jump to that. Founder story. And we've gone over this for many of you in the past. You have to talk about the before, which is their new, their normal. That's that life before that explosive change. And then you share an explosive change and then the new normal. How did that change? Whatever that outside circumstance, it may be a death in the family, maybe a client who passed away, something changed your perspective that has deepened your commitment to give you a stronger why story. Why I do what I do is because of the explosive change that happened in your life. It's important to determine that. It doesn't need to be in your career. It could be before your career. And we'll give some examples of that here in just a moment. But there's always a defining moment that catapults your motivation and values and motives. And we need to pinpoint that, share it. Now, how do we share it? In an effective way, you've got to make sure, and this is the piece a lot of people forget, you've got to have identifiable characters. If you tell your story and they come into your office and they mention nothing about the details of the characters in your story, the emotions, or the perspective of the point in time of the story that you told, and they make no mention of it in the entire first meeting, then you need to revisit your founder story. Usually people will make mention, for instance, I talk about my parents being emergency foster care parents for over 80 kids in 20 years. And that gets brought up. There are other examples similar to that. So again, people want to know that you've had similar shared experiences, but to anchor the story so they remember it and don't forget you, there needs to be identifiable characters. So identifiable characters, emotions that were experienced point in time, you just want to give them reference. Was it 20 years ago? You don't need to give dates. You can always use things like the 2008 crash. We all very much remember that. We all have someone who was affected by that. And so we all can relate to that and put it into a point in time that we all can relate to. All of these elements help burn those memories into their brains so that they will not forget you. And if they don't need you now, when they do need you, they're going to go to the first person they can think of that they felt good about. And that's why the founder story is so important. Okay. So here's the entire recipe. So if you want to screenshot this, it's Windows Shift S, hold them all down at the same time, and you can screenshot. I actually printed this out and I put it on my wall because this is the kind of the summary of making sure anytime I tell a story, whether it's the founder story or a story you're telling inside of a sales meeting, you want to make sure it always includes these characters. If you're writing a book, include all of these elements. This is the recipe. And it is combining the last two slides, characters, emotions, point in time, and then discussing what things are like before the explosive change and what life is like after the explosive change, and how has that changed the way that you do business, the commitment that you have to your business, the motives that you have. You know, most people feel about financial advisors and life insurance agents that you're just there to make money. You're just trying to sell them a product. And so the founder story will dispel that suspicion if you tell it in the right way with the right formula. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this week's Digital Advisor Weekly Live. Hope that was valuable for you. Of course, either comment or reach out to us. You can email rob@amhsupport.com. Otherwise, we'll see you next week, Wednesdays, 8 a.m. Pacific. You guys have a fantastic week.